Dimensions in AutoCAD can be very complicated because they have so many different options to them. Just remember to keep it simple and make sure your dimension styles fit your needs. I want to look at a few key systems, variables, and methods of dimensioning. The settings I'm talking about is the DIM Associates, or DIM-ASSOC. Let's open up an example file. Let's look at the dimension example drawing file. Keep in mind that there are 3 settings for the DIM Associates setting for this variable, 0, 1, and 2. So if I type this in, DIM-ASSOC, that's the command. Press enter. The default value that you're going to want to use almost 99% of the time is 2, because it just makes everything work. There's also a setting of 0 and 1. 0 turns off the DIM Associates setting. This means that the dimensions are not associated to anything. In fact, they won't even be dimension objects. So right now with it set to 2, if I draw a dimension here, any type of dimension, and then I go to select it, you see it's a dimension object. If I open up my properties palette and I select it, it tells me it's a rotated dimension. That's the type of dimension it is. Now, if I go to my DIM Associates value and I turn it to 0, of course, this dimension will stay the same. It was already drawn in. But if I create a new dimension, I get a lot more options. This is the absolutely very old setting for dimensions that we used to use before associated dimensions. But it's still here. It's a legacy command. And when you go to use it, it asks for a lot more information, like the value. Once you type it in, you can see here, this is not a dimension. This is just a series of lines. It's also a text object. And we have an arrowhead here that is really just a solid. So I can't easily change or edit like I can here. You don't want to use this unless there's something absolutely strange about your dimension that you can't get to work right. So that's what that setting does. Now, if you explode a dimension, that's kind of the same result. It just turns it into a bunch of lines, text, and solids. Now, there's a difference between setting 1 and setting 2. And a lot of times you'll find older files set up this way that will be set to number 1. Now, number 1 turns them back into a dimension object. So now when I create this dimension, I select it, it's a dimension object. Same way as if I select the old one. I'm going to erase these to get this out of the way. But this is a setting that you need to use to manually set your scale. As you can see here, this dimension is 1.63 units. If I set my DIM Associates setting to 2, and I will dimension the exact same spot, you'll see here I'm getting a different value. The dimension setting for 2 associates your dimension insert points to the object in model space that you pick while you're dimensioning in paper space. Setting 1 doesn't do that. It takes the absolute true length of what you're actually measuring in whatever space you're in, be it model or paper space. So if I double click inside this viewport to activate it, and I change my DIM Associates setting to 1, and I dimension this. First of all, my dimension is not to scale, so it's not showing up right. But you'll see here as I zoom in, I get the proper length, 65 feet. Same as in here. Setting 2 allows you to work in paper space. It measures the true distance involved, not the viewport scaling. That means that you can make one dimension style regardless of the scales used. So if I'm using the DIM Associates setting of 1, in order for this to scale properly, I have to go into my style manager and I have to set up the scale of my drawing right here. So if I change this, let's say to a scale factor of 10, set that one current, and I'd make a dimension here. It scales up the value that it's measuring by a factor of 10. So you can see here, this is 1 to 1, this is 1 to 10, and this is a true value based on the viewport scale. This is easier. Setting 2 is easier because if I have multiple viewports at different scales, which you will often do, especially on architectural drawings or mechanical drawings, then I don't have to set that up. I can just go with it. Also, the setting of 2 works everywhere. It works in paper space, it works in model space. Some people prefer to dimension in model space, some people prefer to dimension in paper space, and sometimes you may have a need to do both. I don't suggest that, but sometimes that happens. Setting it to 2 means there's less work for you to do. The settings of 0 and 1 are legacy settings that are still there because Autodesk never gets rid of old commands or systems variables. They kind of bury them deep in there, but they keep them in, and that's the legacy thing that you might come across from time to time, but just set it to 2 and everything will work fine. So if you get a drawing from somebody and it's not measuring properly when you do your dimensions, check that setting. Also check the setting in the dimension styles for the scale factor, see if that's doing something crazy, and you'll have to keep an eye on that if it's not looking right.